Fitz, that is the perfect image to come back to with you on your phone, looking at more information about what's going on right now with Penn State recruiting. Of course, we're going to have a Inside the Den podcast coming up this week to give you the details inside the details about recruiting in this final push. Lots of important stuff going on. Some of the more public things we're going to talk about here on Fitz's recruiting updates. So where do you want to start in the recruiting news from this weekend, Fitz?
I'm going to start right now with some developing news, and it was perfect day for your word of the day calendar to be machination. I don't know where that came from, but when you said that, all of a sudden, Mack Brown got fired at North Carolina. So
Oh,
that's
here
an
we go.
interesting one because you look at the coaching changes and a lot of them are expected. And Mack Brown was kind of expected in terms of like, this was one that should happen. But Mack, I believe he said it again this week that he planned on coming back. Yeah. So that's a big one. You look at North Carolina's commit list and there's a guy that really is sticking out there. Penn State has been after Bryce Baker, the quarterback for a while. There's contacts there. Danny O'Brien went to the same high school as Bryce Baker. And Penn State's been on him for a while. And basically, it was a situation where Bryce Baker's not going to look around if Mack Brown's still the head coach. I know a couple other schools, Clemson's still talking to him as well. Michigan had been reaching out, but of course, they got Bryce Underwood last week. So all of a sudden, and I'm not saying it's going to happen because this is very, very much a developing story, but Bryce Baker might be in a situation where he's, all of a sudden back on the market or at least entertaining options. You're going to see situations like this, and signing day is in a week and a half, or I guess 2 weeks now. Signing day is not far off. Actually, no, gosh, this calendar is messing me up, man. It's a week from tomorrow. So do guys like Bryce Baker all of a sudden have to push it back to February? Is he a January enrollee? I don't know. So usually quarterbacks are. So all of a sudden, this got interesting. So very, very curious to see, because Penn State's one of the few schools that has kept up contact. And I think Baker, probably one of the few schools that Baker has allowed to keep up contact, because he's always been pretty much all in for North Carolina. I don't know how quickly North Carolina can have a coach in place. The December calendar is going to be interesting because it goes dead and then it opens back up to quiet. So maybe you can get guys back on campus in December, and maybe he's the guy that pops up. And you look at Penn State's situation at quarterback in the class of 2025. Beckham Kritza, of course, still in the class, but Penn State's been looking for a while now. So that's just to me, and this is just off the top of the head riffing type stuff. Like, that's very interesting to have the coaching change in Chapel Hill happen on a live show. Of course, I'd love to have more information before I rattled off and open my mouth about it. But this is one Penn State's been tracking for a while. I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, and it's not anything that we haven't been talking about as well. Like this has been kind of on your radar for a little bit. Another great reason to be subscribed to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, because these are the details that when they become public and we have this conversation, there is that backstory for you to know. So just clarify something for me, because I think this is always the confusion in my head and probably in other people's heads. You don't have to sign and this might be what you just said, you don't have to just sign next Wednesday. So with the new calendar and how condensed everything is, a player, and there are probably 25 players having to make this decision now with Mack Brown being fired, they don't have to make a decision in 8 days, right? That they could sign in, or they could go to places in December and then try to make a decision within that time frame. You can commit any time in December. Just most people make their decision on that first day. Is that accurate, or is there more shades of gray there?
Yeah. Actually, I think you don't have to sign. Like, that's the thing here. Like, you can figure out a way to get around it and just enroll in January. Like, I don't think you have to figure all that stuff out if you actually enroll. It's kind of what the transfers go through. So you've got an opportunity, if you're Bryce Baker, to maybe sit this one out in signing day. And I don't know what North Carolina is doing with the staff. I think I just read that Mack Brown's going to coach this weekend. But that's a heck of a turnaround time, because usually you have those 3 or 4 weeks where it's kind of dead season for coaches there. If you're getting fired, you have a chance to either make a quick hire and turn that around, or flesh it out until the new year. So I don't know how it's going to go, but yeah, if he's a January kid, he doesn't have to sign on December to still end up somewhere in January. So I think that's very, very interesting. Like I said, I don't know the details in terms of when he wants to get to North Carolina or wherever he ends up. But I mean, in terms of throwing wrenches into plans, the week before you're supposed to sign, that's a pretty good indication that he might pick up the phone if James Franklin calls him today.
Yeah, and that's one of those situations you called all the way back in August, and we've had this conversation all year long of, this is going to be messy. with the timeline of when coaches get fired to this signing day, there's going to be a lot of newness for everyone around this particular situation. So we'll keep you up to date at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Of course, Fitz and Ryan Snyder are going to be doing a great job getting you that information and trying to source the facts away from just the news and what's going on out in the public.
And to play off of what I said about not necessarily like signing and enrolling, there's also really nothing penalizing someone from going somewhere or signing. Like he could sign with North Carolina. Julian Sayin last year signed with Alabama. Kalen DeBoer comes in, brings his own guy with him, and all of a sudden, I think he committed to Ohio State in January, like mid-January, late January, something like that. So like he's not exactly tied down if he does sign with North Carolina. So I think that there's some interesting developments there. It's just it's one of those things where the rules are kind of crazy, but with the portal, like he can go in the portal on January 5th. You know, it's not a big deal for him. So very curious,
especially somebody who has options, as many options as a quarterback, not only the position, but also, as you can see, a consensus 4-star player, a top 200 player at the very least, if not a top 150, if not a top 100 player, across the board in the industry rankings. You can see here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. If you're listening on the podcast, obviously, you're hearing me say these things. It's not a wide range in the consensus. 192 is the lowest, 74 on 3. I trust our rankings and Charles Power the most, obviously. So this is a very good quarterback who is just outside the top 10 in this class. I'm not saying he's going to end up at Penn State, but I'm just saying when you get this news on a live show, that's where the first place my brain went to, and because they have been talking to him for a while now. So it's not a situation where it's like, oh, Mack Brown's fired, let's take a look at that commit list and see who makes sense. This is a guy that they've actually been talking to, and this is a guy that they've got some connections with. So in terms of turning up at the end of the cycle, that's very interesting to me. So what else is going on this weekend? A couple things here before we get into the mailbag.
Yeah, this weekend's interesting. I actually go back to last weekend. I didn't realize how much. Well, first off, from a Penn State scheduling perspective, that kind of sucked because you look around the country last weekend and this was the big rush weekend. Like this weekend coming up is big in the sense, but it's also a holiday weekend. So not everybody wants to travel. Some guys want to, like the younger guys probably want to go to Ohio State, Michigan. I don't blame them. Auburn, Alabama. I don't blame them as well.
Yeah.
Penn State, Maryland, probably not as quite on the high on the list there. But last weekend, a more important weekend with the way that the calendar is set up with signing day next week, more important weekend than I gave it credit for. So you saw guys pop up for visits for games. You saw guys pop up for visits for bye weeks. Brendan Finney went to Oregon over the weekend. That's, I don't think, great news for Penn State at all. It was just a really random weekend. So if you're trying to figure out and you're trying to hammer out the final details before you sign, last weekend was a big weekend and Penn State was on the road. So that kind of sucked for them in terms of the grand scheme of things. Also, Andrew Olish, from a Penn State perspective, you thought it was going to be okay because his game got moved from Friday night. They were playing in Shamokin Friday night to Saturday. And you're like, okay, well, he's not going to Michigan anymore for a game visit. Well, he went to Michigan on Sunday. So there's that to deal with. I think and we'll talk more about this on the premium show, but Bryce Underwood's presence is certainly a talking point in that recruitment. Beyond that, Jayden Woods, the Penn State defensive end commit, went to Florida over the weekend for a visit. There's a lot to take in over this past weekend. And like I said, I probably underrated it and didn't even think about it twice, to be honest with you, when you're talking about the scheduling. But having a week or having a home game the week before Thanksgiving all of a sudden is a big deal. It's kind of like the Lash Bash in the sense that some guys want to make their decision before their season, before they get into practice and everything like that in August. So this is your last ditch effort to get them in. And yes, this coming weekend is a last ditch effort, but comparatively to some of the big games that we saw around the country last weekend, it's probably not going to live up to that standard. I think the visitor list, and Ryan has started the visitor list on Blue White Illustrated, it'll be solid, but I don't think it's going to be anything spectacular just based on the timing of the weekend and the other options, especially out west in Ohio.
So just kind of a temperature gauge for you here. Don't have to give any details because, again, we're going to be talking about this extensively here this week. Coming down the stretch, hot, cold, lukewarm. Like, how's your oatmeal coming into National Signing Day for Penn State's chances to add a couple of players or, retain what they have here?
certainly still a possibility. It's not hot. I'll tell you that. Wrote in the SN last week that it was there's some things that some shoes still to be dropped and things of that nature. There's still a bunch of guys on the board, but number one, you've got to retain the guys that you have. Of course, you've got situations like Jayden Woods going to Florida. You've got Chaz Coleman, who picked up an Ohio State offer. You can't ignore that, obviously. So that's priority number one. Then you've got those guys that are pretty much the same cluster of guys that we've been talking about that are, yet to make decisions, or they have made decisions and they just haven't, the flip targets haven't completely finalized those things. So yeah, I would not say hot at all is basically how I would go with that.
Brad Moeller asks, is Finney coming this weekend? That is a great question for BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You can sign up right now and you can get premium access to all of our best stuff, including maybe that answer on the 2025 recruiting message board. You enroll for $1 this week, and then you're enrolled for a year at half off. It is our best two deals. Everyone loves the dollar deal. They love getting in and trying things out, and people love signing up for half off. We combine them for you, which you can subscribe. And this is a really important time of year to get the rest of the sentence. Like, this recruiting update is half of the sentence. The other half we save for people over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com.